Hello, I'm Eleanor Lamb. I came to live in Inishowen in 1994, so I've lived longer here than anywhere else. I have been a musician for a large part of my life. I teach music, but I'm really keen on the traditional songs and the traditional singing circle that's here in Inishowen. That's really been just a great resource for me and a great sense of a source of my social life, really, you know. Songs don't know borders, really, and songs have travelled back and forth, particularly with people who've emigrated back and forth. And a lot of people in Inishowen would have gone to Scotland for seasonal work and come back with songs. So a lot of them, though they're sung in Inishowen, they would also be sung in other parts of the country and in other parts of the world. And a lot of them travelled to America and then came back in different forms, slightly changed. There are songs which mention place names in Inishowen or people's names, but in another part of the country they might contain the place names of that part of the country. They're just adapted to fit wherever the song is being sung, really. I did come across, in terms of the songs about women dressing up as men and going to sea, I have come across one song that purports to be from Donegal, about a woman from Donegal. I don't know what part of Donegal, it doesn't say in the song, but she dressed up and went to sea to look for her long lost love, which she didn't find. But instead, when she was rumbled, when the sailor who discovered her true identity was rebuffed by her and she refused to give in to his wicked ways, he then told the whole crew, and she was treated really badly for the rest of the journey. She was made to do the most dangerous and the dirtiest work, and eventually she was rescued by somebody from on shore who came onto the boat, I think delivering some produce or something, and saw her being beaten by one of the other sailors. Didn't realise she was a woman, but stepped in to save her, and then she ended up going back home to her parents, but she never found her lover. Whereas in most of the songs they do, and in the song I sing, the woman is not interested in finding a lover. She's just interested in going to sea for a bit of adventure and a bit of crack and a different life. So this song is called The Female Cabin Boy. Oh, it's of a fair young maiden, as you will understand, who had a mind for roving unto a foreign land. So dressed in man's apparel, she boldly did appear. She engaged with a captain to serve him for a year. She engaged with a captain, his cabin boy to be. The wind was in his favour, and he put out to sea. The captain's lady being on board, oh, it was to her joy that her husband had engaged with that handsome cabin boy. Her cheeks were red like roses, and with her sidelock curl, the sailors often laughed and said she looked just like a girl. But eating captain's biscuits the colour did destroy, and the waist did swell on pretty Nell, the female cabin boy. 'Twas on the Bay of Biscay our gallant ship did plough. One night among the sailors there was an awful row. They tumbled from their hammocks 'cause their rest it did destroy, and 'twas all about the moaning of the female cabin boy. Oh, doctor, the cabin boy did cry. The sailors swore by all the gods the cabin boy would die. The doctor came a-running and a-laughing at the fun, that a cabin boy should either have a daughter or a son. Now when the sailors heard of this, they all began to swear it did belong to none of them, they'd solemnly declare. The captain's lady standing near to her husband said so coy, it's either you or I betrayed that handsome cabin boy. Sea shanties were obviously connected with working at sea. To get to the men working in rhythm, they would sing a sea shanty, and they're probably universal right around the world. Not just sea shanties, but work songs that would be rhythmic and get the people working together. And we know the workers on the chain gangs in America used to sing to keep the rhythm going. So they seem to have been sort of lost around Inishowen. I'm not aware of any particularly connected with Inishowen or anybody in Inishowen singing sea shanties. But Sam Henry, who collected songs from right across the north of Ireland, and he collected a lot of songs, which is brought out in this book, which is a reprint of his songs called Songs of the People, in which there are some sea shanties. And he talks about it possibly being people considering it unlucky to sing them off the boats because they were just connected with work. Other people thinking they weren't really songs, they were just to help men at their work. But there was a big sort of superstition about them, possibly, that they weren't meant to be sung away from the sea and away from the boats. So everybody knows the song written by Johnny Doohan and sung by Christy Moore, among others, called The Voyage, which is using seafaring and boats as an analogy for a relationship. So I've turned it on its head and used the same melody and similar words as an analogy for coercive control and domestic abuse. So instead of calling it The Voyage, I've called it The Trip. So we'll give this a go. You are the captain, I am only deckhand. We signed on together, the future looked grand. But you took over the wheelhouse from the very first trip, and that's how it's been in this relationship. With your back set against me, you steered your own course. You had no thought for my needs, no words of remorse. I rode out the worst storms in patience and hope, trying my best not to break, but to cope. Life is an ocean, this love is a wreck. In troubled waters, I've clung to the deck. I have reared our 5 children with no help from you, and now emigrated and gone are our crew. Together we've been in this relationship, but all of the time you've been on your own trip. Now there's not much that's left for a woman to do, but to bail out and build herself a canoe. Life is an ocean, this love is a wreck. In troubled waters, I've clung to the deck. I have reared our 5 children with no help from you, and now emigrated and gone are our crew. Sinead. I think for the women who were left at home while their menfolk went to sea, it must have been a very difficult time, particularly in the bad weather. They were just obviously full of anxiety, worrying about their menfolk, whether they would come back safely or not. They had the added worry, not just because, but the menfolk were the breadwinners, really, and if they lost their menfolk, they would be subjected to huge poverty. But they also had to do all the work around the house, and if there were animals, they had to be fed and cleaned out and looked after, as well as the wains and the cooking and the baking and the cleaning and the washing and all of that. And it must have been a really difficult time, and rearing the wains on their own as well, basically. So that must have been quite hard for them. And there have been an awful lot of disasters, fishing disasters in this area in particular. I have 2 neighbours here who are both from Glengad and who have both lost members of their family in fishing disasters. So it's a really tough life. So there's a very interesting book written about the memories of people in the Glengad community. And obviously the Glengad community was a big fishing community. And they used boats called Drontons or Drontimes, which were double prowed boats. They were a prow on both ends, related very much to the old Viking boats, and that's where they get the name Drontheim, because from Trondheim in the Scandinavia. But they were quite unstable, I think. McDonald's in Greencastle built them, and there are still some around, but they're mostly used in regattas, just as showpieces. So there were a lot of lives lost at sea in Glengad. There's a memorial up at Glengad Pier and a huge list on it of all the people who were drowned. And in this book, there's a list at the back of the book of all the people and the boats that went down. A huge litany of lives lost, and very, very tragic, really. And I don't know how the families come to terms with that. It must be a really, really tough thing to come to terms with. The only work around the fishing industry, the only thing that I am aware of was the herring gutters, which was when the herring shoals were plentiful. The women, the boats would follow the herring shoals around the coast, going from port to port, landing their catch. So the women would follow the boats from port to port, and they would, their job was to gut the herrings and to salt them and to pack them into these huge big wooden barrels for sale. And they would then be taken to different parts of Ireland or to other parts of the world, I presume. But it was really nasty work. It was horrible work. They would often cut their hands. Their hands would also be exposed to this wet salt and you know, very damaging for their skin. Plus they were out in all weathers, and it's just really hard labour. That term, herring gutter or herring gutter's daughter, was used as a derogatory term and a slanderous term against people trying to put them down. It was very tough work and probably very poorly paid, and they were a very low social standing. In fact, I came across an interesting thing. Apparently, the way every county has a nickname, especially in GAA circles, the Donegal team has been known as the herring gutters. So that's sort of an interesting thing, which it just shows how important the herring industry was in the past when the herring shoals were plentiful. I think possibly also the reason why the herring gutters was used as an insulting term to women was because a lot of these women came into a community from another community. And we have to remember, back in the day in Inishowen, the transport, we weren't able to just fly around, and they weren't able to fly around their cars the way we are now. So to go from Clonmany to Mallinhead, you would be seen as an outsider. So you were possibly seen as a threat by the other women. A lot of superstitions around women going to sea. Women were not allowed on boats, particularly fishing boats, because it was considered very unlucky. Now, I don't know if we were all that powerful that we could get the storms to rise up and destroy the fishing boats, but that was the superstition. I think it was probably more because of the misogynistic sort of society that was around in those days, and there's still there to some extent, where it was considered that a woman's place was in the home, and she had to stay at home and look after the wains and do all the dirty work at home. But the other thing was if you're a red-haired woman, you were considered an even worse threat. And if a fisherman even saw a red-haired woman when he was on his way to the boat, he would turn around and go home, because he would be a red-haired woman forecast disaster at sea. So we were very powerful. Not that I'm a redhead, but anyway. There were other superstitions not connected with women at all that were within the seafaring community. One was a superstition that you don't go to sea on the equinox, because the equinox was associated with stormy weather. So that might have been a sort of a safety precaution. Yes, I mean, I think a lot of the superstitions were a way of controlling women too, and putting them firmly in their place. I mean, we have to realise that way back, we were living in a much more matriarchal society, and then there was a big shift away from that. And the whole thing against witches was because women had the powers, medicinal powers, and the powers of curing people, and then the men wanted to take that from them. I'm not an expert on this area, but I'm aware of some of the theories connected with that.